prominent politician was caught in a pretty embarrassing scandal. Not just embarrassing from a personal or public perspective, but from a criminal one. See, this politician was, like so many have, on social media, perusing the different pages and profiles of people who were following his career, and he came across the profile of a very beautiful young woman. And because he had connections, he could find out who this young woman was, and he kind of struck up a relationship of sorts, an affair. The politician was married, but as we have found out, that never stops politicians necessarily. She was married as well, so they carried on their affair in secret. And then something very unexpected happened. They found out that she was pregnant. And what's worse, they found out at a time when her husband was about to be deployed to war, to the front lines of Afghanistan. They tried to arrange a cover-up, and it didn't work, so the politician pulled some strings, made sure that he was placed in one of the more dangerous villages where he died. And that gave the politician the ability to swoop in, marry this young woman who just suffered tragedy, save her from a life of woe. Unfortunately, a snooping reporter found out about the whole thing and published it to the shock and outrage of no one. Because I'm not describing a story that happened in contemporary modern times. I'm talking about a story that actually happened in the Bible. A story that you may be somewhat familiar with, but we're going to look at with fresh eyes today. It's the story of David and Bathsheba. Now, you may take issue at the last bit of that story when I said it's the shock and outrage of no one. But the truth of the matter is, this is one of the genuinely most horrific, horrible things that's ever been written in the Bible. And yet, and a lot of people know this story. If David is probably most known for David and Goliath, but this is probably the second most known story of David. And the fact of the matter is, he pretty much gets a pass at the end of it all. Everybody kind of looks at it like, oh, he just kind of screwed up. Like screwed up when he slept with another man's husband or wife and then had that man killed and then tried to cover it up. Yeah, that kind of screw up. Because if the story I told you was about a contemporary politician today, a president, a prime minister, a senator, a congressman, do you think that kind of story would just go away? It wouldn't, would it? Do you think that person would stay in office? Absolutely not. We've seen this song and dance again and again and again. It's very hard for someone who even has an affair and it goes public to revive their political career. David gets a pass, and I'm here to tell you today, as we look at this story with some fresh eyes and hopefully a fresher perspective, whether you've heard this story before or whether it's the first time and you're really like shocked to find out a sermon is going to be about this kind of subject matter, we got to look at this and we got to ask ourselves some serious questions. And above all, the most serious question of them all is, why do we create folk tales out of real people in the Bible? Because that happens. We lift up some figures of the Bible and we say, oh, they're awesome. They're the people we should follow after. And the fact of the matter is, that's not what God has in mind. That's not why the Bible is here. It's not for us to pick some, choose some, ignore others, and elevate some and say this is how we should live. The Bible is a collection of these stories to continually remind us of how God deals with humanity in different situations. And this is a good example where the Bible gives us the whole story, even when the story is downright ugly. Even when it involves someone who typically gets things right. Life is more complicated than that. And that is the first thing right off the bat. If you are disappointed at the fact that David does this, if you are disgusted, if you find yourself wondering how in the world could I ever like this guy, after the last 2 weeks where we've seen David kind of at his best, now we're going to see him at his worst, it's just a very good reminder of this is how people are. Capable of great things, incredible things, acts of incredible love and mercy and charity, and then people who have an Ashley Madison account. Over 30 million, 400 pastors that we know about, one Christian university professor who committed suicide because of the shame. A few years ago, there's a popular show on called To Catch a Predator, where they would set up sting operations to catch men who were trying to have an illicit relationship with a young female online. They had so many religious leaders who would show up on this program that after a while they had a special dedicated to just pastors and rabbis and church elders. And what we often do is we just shake our fingers at the TV screen or the news and say, oh, that's awful. But we don't recognize that this kind of darkness, we're all capable of it. The Bible gives us these stories, hopefully so that we can look at them as adults, look at the subject matter, and then deal with what might be going on in our own hearts and souls. That's why it's there. And so I'm going to ask you to turn to 2 Samuel chapter 11. That's where we're going to be at. While you're turning over there, I want to go through some scriptures that really set this up for us, that give us a little background into David. Because one of the worst things that happens when we go to 2 Samuel chapter 11, I have heard this preached and taught so many times, and it's taught and set up in a way where David was just out on his roof one night, and he saw a woman bathing, and just lust came over him, and he just acted completely out of character. And I'm going to tell you right now, he didn't act out of character. He did exactly what he would, what I would have guessed he would do in this situation. And I know that based on how David has been brought up to think about women. All the way back in 1 Samuel, it says that Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David. And when they told Saul about it, that's the people around Saul, his advisors, this is what Saul said. I will give her to him so that she may be a snare to him, so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. And so Saul said to David, you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law. This is David's first marriage. And, you know, Michal is in love with David initially, but everything else about it is political wrangling. Saul is fearful of the type of fame that David is accumulating, and David is this kind of, at this point, know-nothing from the hillsides of Bethlehem, and he probably, liked Michal, but he's a young man, and he's very unsure about this whole situation, and this is how these two became married. It says David took his men with him and went out and killed 200 Philistines and brought back their foreskins. They counted out the full number to the king so that David might become the king's son-in-law. Yep, that was the courtship right there. I tell you, they should make a reality show based on that. Somebody would watch it. That is the weirdest episode of The Bachelor ever described right there. That's how David marries his first wife. Not very romantic, is it? Oh yeah, by the way, I am speaking correctly. His first wife, because he'll have more. In fact, if we go over to 2 Samuel chapter 2, it says, in the course of time, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah? The Lord said, go up. Where shall I go? To Hebron, the Lord answered. So David went up there with his two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. So I'm really going to put your math skills to the test. How many wives does David have right now? Three. And this is how messed up it is. Michal, his first wife, she's the daughter of Saul. David and Saul haven't gotten along. So the time David's been in exile, Michal actually is given over to marriage to someone else. So this family is starting to grow, and it's starting to become strange. David has 3 wives, one that doesn't even live with him, which is his first. And no, they're not from Utah. But you know what? After a while, 3 wives just becomes, old hat. Especially when you become king. When you become king, there's certain expectations. You've always got to have more. And so David, this is what he does in 2 Samuel chapter 5. After he left Hebron, David took more concubines and wives in Jerusalem. And more sons and daughters were born to him. These are the names of the children born to him there: Shammua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphelet. Now, that's not even all of David's kids. Because David has a son named Amnon, that's his eldest. His favorite son is Absalom. And he's got a daughter named Tamar. So, these are just the kids that are born to these wives and these concubines. Yeah, I said concubines. David not only has multiple wives, he now has multiple women that he just sleeps with because, that's their job. They're professional women who sleep and have sex with the king. Oh, man. Pastor Josh said David has sex with people. That's in the Bible, folks. Now, why would I go through this? Am I trying to smear David, run him through the mud? No, this is who David is. And so when we get to 2 Samuel chapter 11, to say that David's walking on the roof and he sees this beautiful woman and lust just overtakes him and he does something completely out of character, no. This is how David treats women. And you know what? It's not very good, is it? Because if I treated women like this, if I started showing up with 3 or 4 girls, well, first of all, Sarah would break up with me about as quickly as anybody can because she's a very smart woman. She knows she doesn't have to put up with that. But if I was showing up, or Christian was showing up, Christian just got married this year, if he was sending out announcements about how he's going to have another marriage, I'd say, man, I'm not going to get you another guitar. This is your way of just getting more stuff. You're going to have to find a new way. We would start to, people would be like, that is weird. That is strange. That's like cult-like behavior. That's David, ladies and gentlemen. That's how he treats and thinks about women. And what we have to understand about the story of David and Bathsheba is this is where David's long-standing treatment of women and personality defect and sin, this is where it comes to a head. It doesn't just start here. It's been going on. And here's another thing. The Lord never said, hey, I think you should marry these women. This is all on David. This is a mess he makes. We've got to understand that as we go in. Now, we got the backstory. We know how David is. Let's look at the story itself. It says, in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. That is a big deal. This is another one of those things that we kind of read over. It's not really that interesting or amazing, or it's kind of in antiquity, can't quite understand it. This is a huge deal, though. This really sets up the whole scene. Because Israel has gone off to war, and for the first time, at least that we know of in the Bible, David doesn't go with them. And that is a change. Because David is the type of leader that he is leading his men out to war. He is in the front. And for some reason, he sends an emissary. For some reason, he stays back. And this is where we start to understand something. David's different. Something's happened to him. And he might be injured. be a good reason to stay back, right? He physically can't go anymore. Or he's older. Bible says that David ruled Israel for 40 years. The average lifespan of someone who lived in Israel at the time of David was about 30 years. 30, 35 years. When the Bible speaks of the elders, it's people who are into their 40s. We enjoy some really incredible things medically, health-wise, that they couldn't have even dreamed of then. And so if the Bible is telling us that David rules Israel for 40 years, and he's had this kind of life, this young life, young adulthood before, David, by the time he's getting near the end of his reign, he is an old man by everybody's standards. And so he's either injured or he can't go. What happens when someone tells you you can't do something? Because you've hurt yourself. It's frustrating, isn't it? It never ceases to amaze me that we are at our worst when we're sick or when we're injured, because someone will say, hey, you should do this. And what's our first response? I'm not going to do that. And by the way, I am the person that does that. I've got a headache. There's an Advil. I'm not going to take Advil. I'm going to tough it out. It's cold season. You should take as I can. No, I'll be fine. Cold can't keep me down. Free flu shot, you can take that. But if it's someone we love, I think you should take a pain pill, honey. I think you should do this. I think you should do that. We are our own worst enemy when it comes to when we're not feeling well, aren't we? Amen? The only thing worse is, and I'm going to get some amens here. I'm going to be very careful as I say this. It's hard when you start to get to a certain age and you can't do certain things anymore. Sometimes we're not the first to recognize it. And more than one of us has been and become bitter when that happens. The Bible has given us some information here that's important. It is giving us a window into David's mindset. His men are off at war, and David has to sit home. And so, there's got to be some frustration there. And I don't know about you, but when I am frustrated, I'm not always making the best decisions. In fact, when I'm frustrated, I'm sometimes at my most vulnerable for making mistakes that I'm susceptible of, sins that really do tempt me. That might not be you. I know that's me. And I think that's David, because this is one evening, David got up from his bed and walked around the roof of the palace. And that's not weird. In Israel at this time, they had flat roofs, and they would often go up there. That's a pretty normal thing. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. And this is really, really sad, because the Bible even says she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. And she went back home. And she conceived and sent word to David saying, I'm pregnant. They didn't have a relationship. Sometimes, there's been movies, there's been series where they've kind of dramatized this because they want to make David look good. They fell in love. And I'll tell you what, we have some strange definitions for love out there. The very fact that 50 Shades of Grey has sold so many copies and so many people have seen that movie and think that that's a model relationship, that ought to tell us a lot. Ileana's going to be working overtime these next few years. This wasn't love. David saw a woman. She looked good. He's king. He has the power to send for her. She can't say no. In the law, we have a word for that. That's called statutory rape. Oh, we're not supposed to use those words in church. We're not supposed to talk about that in sermons. That is what the Bible is telling us. There's darkness there. Now, you've heard me preach about David. And I have said things about David that are incredible. He is a man after God's own heart. Last week, we looked at how he literally went and took someone whose life was going to nothing. He was living in a place called nothing. The grandson of his greatest enemy, the son of his best friend, and he healed that relationship. David did that because it was the right thing. David did the right thing. David did have a strong faith in God. He did look around the courts of his own palace and say, it's not right for me to live in such splendor when God is living in such squalor. That is David. But you know what? The same David that is full of such capable, incredible light is full of darkness. And it tells us something about humanity we must pay attention to. Each and every single one of us is capable of the most incredible, miraculous, amazing things. We're also capable of incredible, shameful things. Now, from my perspective, I can tell you exactly what happens as a pastor. This just gets blown up to the point where we have such unreal expectations on people behind this pulpit that when they mess up, oh my gosh, not the pastor. The pastor said a curse word? Oh my gosh. I put my pants on one leg at a time like everyone else. And hear me when I say this. Because I know myself, I am incapable of great things to do in the Lord's name, and I'm capable of shameful, sinful things that would embarrass my profession, you, and the Lord. If we don't recognize that, if we are always trying to sweep the negative under the rug or hide the demons in the closet, and we never face them, then guess what? One day we're walking on the roof, about to make the biggest mistake of our lives. These catastrophes, like the one we see here, they don't just all of a sudden happen. We don't just trip, fall into making the biggest mistake of our lives. It starts with clicking on a link we shouldn't click. It starts with, going out on that lunch date with somebody and, probably shouldn't be flirting like that, but we do anyway. And, it's harmless. It starts with, you know what, I'm just cheating on my taxes because, the government doesn't spend my money the way they should, so, they're not going to notice, and I'm not going to get audited. I can talk bad about that person behind their back. They're never going to hear it. And it's not like I'm not telling the truth, right? I'm just telling it to everybody but that person. That's not gossip, even though it is. I don't think David woke up from his bed and said, I'm going to murder somebody. Uriah the Hittite, bad dude, I'm going to make sure he goes to the front lines. He got himself into this jam because he was unwilling to confront something that he'd been living with for a long time. The fact that he just flat out did not know how to treat women. That despite all the great things he did, treated women pretty much as objects. And by the way, if we're not willing to confront our biblical heroes on that, then we're going to have a tough time selling all these moral beliefs onto non-believers. Like, it's really hard to make a case for quote-unquote biblical marriage when this is what a biblical marriage looks like from the Bible. 5 or 6 women, a bunch of concubines, and, a person on the side now. Because non-Christians read the Bible too. They just read it in a different way. So this is what happens. David goes to his commander, Joab, after trying to cover up this misdeed, this getting this woman pregnant. And the funniest thing happens. Uriah, the husband of Bathsheba, he's actually a good man. He comes back to his wife, but he knows that his men, his brothers in arms, they're out in the battle, and he can't just be eating expensive food and having relations with his wife when he's still a soldier and has a duty. Even when the king himself gives him permission. He can't do it because something incredible is happening in Uriah's life. The Bible tells us about Uriah. It says that Uriah is the Hittite. That means Uriah was a foreigner. He was not from Israel. He's not from one of the 12 tribes, but he has heard about them. He's heard about God. And his life has changed. He's come into this society. He's a foreigner, and now he's found a place to belong. He's found a faith that is real. And the only person who does the right thing in this story is the guy. He's the outsider. And guess what his reward is for that? David tells Joab, this guy won't play ball, put him in the front lines, make sure that he dies. How many of you have been doing the right thing for a long time and your time never seems to come? You look around, it seems like those who are greedy, those who are gaming the system, those who are cheaters, they seem to be having all the fun. They seem to be getting all the benefits. They seem to be winning. It's frustrating, isn't it? But once again, the Bible tells us something really incredible. If you do the right thing, you're not always rewarded for it, at least not right now. But we've been telling this story for thousands of years. And every time we tell it, Uriah's star shines brighter. He's one of those people that is forever now associated in the Bible. His story is legend. It's eternal. And he's someone who did the right thing. And that's his legacy. Nothing else is known about this guy except for he did the right thing. He's honored in that way. It's a tough world we're living in. Full of a lot of temptations, if I could be quite honest. A lot of temptations that we could get away with too. Maybe some we're not going to. And I think a lot of times people don't do the right thing because they just don't feel like there's enough of a reward in it. Why should I be honest? Why shouldn't I just cheat a little bit? Why can't I flirt? We call it harmless. It's no big deal. It's no big thing. It is a big deal because it reveals everything about us and our character. Because for as long as we look to the Bible in this story, we will always see David in this light. A man after God's own heart who did incredible things, but yeah, was capable of downright destruction. Let it rule and let it completely ruin his family. Or we can be like Uriah the Hittite. Yeah. Wasn't famous. Didn't hang with a lot of celebrities and sports stars. Didn't have thousands of people at his or her funeral. Whenever I think about that person, man, they always seem to do the right thing. They always put a smile on my face. And the faith that they believed in, they lived up to that standard. The Bible tells us sometimes it's better in the long run not to have that power, not to give in. To, as Christian sang about in his song, to be humble. And that's what David learns from this whole situation. It says in 2 Samuel chapter 12, the Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to see him, Nathan's the prophet, by the way. He's the pastor. When he came to see him, he said there were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger. Heard this story. He didn't like that. And David said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. Then Nathan said to David, and oh, I wish I was there to see the look on his face, you are the man. I anointed you king over Israel. This is the Lord speaking to David. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with your sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. There's something very sad about this story. Nathan goes and tells David a story about fairness. And David doesn't like it. You know what the subject matter is? Sheep. Probably doesn't make much of an impact in our world, so let's say they were iPhones. Rich man had an Android, and the poor man, all he could afford was an iPhone. But we know it's the best, so the rich man took that too. The Bible says that David burned with anger over sheep. What God is trying to tell him is, I gave you everything. I gave you everything. And your problem is you treated people like this. The world is not going to care what you and I have to say about marriage, about moral living, about any of that, if we don't treat people right. We don't love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And all the great that you ever do in your life is not going to matter one iota if you can't face the darkness in your life before it absolutely ruins your character. So what do we do with David? Is he irredeemable? He's not. You know why? Because he gets it. It took the most tragic mistake of his life, a decision that will, quite frankly, ruin his family and really besmirch his legacy. But the Bible tells us that David confesses and seeks God's forgiveness. He doesn't try to trade. He doesn't try to weasel his way out of it like his predecessor did. He owns up to it. There is scripture that's been turned into a beautiful praise song. Created me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me. David writes these words when realizing his sin and going to God for forgiveness. How do we deal with the darkness in our hearts? We go to God. We go to our fellow Christian, our fellow brother and sister. We confess it. We go to this altar. And we get out of this mindset of, oh, that person's coming forward, that person's confessing, or that person is asking for forgiveness. They must have done something terribly wrong. We turn that mindset in the church into a supportive one. Awesome. That person's getting right with the Lord. I have to do the same thing. We'll go and do it together. We can either be the judgmental community that is constantly pointing at the specks in other people's eyes while the log jams in our own. We can either be that, or we can be the community of healing, of acceptance, of love, and of forgiveness. A place where the darkness that we all have, the capable of doing. Place where we can let that go and let our light shine. It takes all of us. And it takes recognizing that, yeah, we are people after God's own heart. But I also have something that I need to let go to Him, for Him to work with. Even after I'm saved, I'm still work in progress. I'm still someone that God needs to touch and heal and forgive and turn around. My prayer for myself, for you, for all Christians, whatever we're dealing with, my prayer is that we go to stories like this, and what we learn is this. This is the application, and this is it. If you've heard me say anything today, I hope you hear me say this. Whoever's watching this, wherever you are, get help before it's too late. Talk about it before you have the affair. Go to the meeting before you pick up the bottle another time. Sell the computer and let your family know what's going on before it ruins everything. It's not going to make you a bad Christian. It's not going to make you a bad person. You know what it's going to make you? A human being. A human being that has problems like everyone else. Let's stop lying to ourselves. Let's stop demanding perfection from the get-go and actually let God perfect us in the image of Christ like we say we believe. If we can learn anything from David, get help while you're on the roof before you take that long fall. And before you burn with anger at another sin, whether it's sheep or whatever, realize we're all capable of terrible, ugly things. What we need is mercy. What we need to project as a community is hope, not judgment. There already is one perfect judge who came And the Bible says this, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life." For God came not to judge the world, not to condemn it, but to save it. If Christ, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, was perfect in every way and saw fit not to condemn his contemporaries, we, his church, should live the same. And so together, resolve that darkness and let it out light. Heavenly Father, today,